Take a quick minute to thank the Engineering Chapter leadership team for organizing and producing this valuable content for our members. Before I turn the program over to the Engineering Co-Chair, Aditi Banerjee, I noticed my slide is also incorrect. Boy, I would like to cover one housekeeping item. All the lines, with the exception of the speakers, are muted. So please use the chat box on the bottom of your screen for comments and questions, and we'll monitor and address those at the appropriate time. And again, I want to thank everyone for their patience this morning. I know it's a Tuesday, but for me, it really feels like a Monday. And I'm going to pass it over to Aditi.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll just take a minute and introduce everyone who is going to be speaking today. Kindly let me know if you can see the screen.
We can see it, Aditi. Thank you.
Great. So today we are going to talk about trends and opportunities in engineering services outsourcing. And this content today is brought to you by HCL and ISG. So myself, I'm Dr. Aditi Banerjee. I'm Vice President in HCL America. I have worked in HCL IoT Works, which focuses on digital and IoT technologies. And prior to that, I worked in Infosys Engineering Services. And prior to that, I was with Texas Instruments in product development, product marketing. I would like to introduce Vishnu Andhare, who is the consulting manager from ISG Engineering Services. He's based out of Europe. And Mike Harmon, who is the director of ISG Engineering Services Americas. And Mike is based out of Illinois and brings a wealth of experience in mechanical engineering and consultation with manufacturing firms. So hopefully you will enjoy the webinar today, and feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or anything you want to discuss in the engineering services outsourcing field. I'm going to hand this over to Mike for walking us through the content.
Thank you, Aditi. So for this morning's agenda, we're just going to quickly go through and try and set the context. The context being really what is the current situation of engineering services and how is product development taken shape. And we've seen a number of changes just in the last couple of years that will continue to evolve in the near future. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And then we want to talk about, what it takes to succeed inside of that world. And then what does the evolution of that marketplace look like? And then we'll go through a brief case study of, how we see some of that being applied out in the marketplace, and then save some time towards the end for Q&A. And to go through any questions that you all may have. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So really, what is this about? I mean, I think when you look at products and how products are being made, it's being heavily impacted by connectivity and digital content. This doesn't make the products any less mechanical in nature. All the products still need to physically exist. There's still an industrial design element. But what it does do is it does make the electrical and mechanical systems more complex. It makes their interactions more complex, and it dramatically increases the amount of software and electrical engineering content inside of those products. So it's not really a replacement of so much as we see it really just being an adding on and an exponential growth on the electronic side, while we continue to see growth in the other aspects of the business. But because we are now wanting this connectivity in products, this causes us to have a need to integrate the operational technology and embedded systems of those products, often with informational technology and IT systems, not only in the products themselves, but also in how those products are manufactured and put together. And so these digital forces are responding to them is really no longer a choice. And so I think if you would go back 10 years ago, there were products that didn't have that connectivity, but and you were able to maybe be more traditional. But what we're really seeing today is it's starting to permeate all the different industry verticals that we see. And so it now is becoming something that enterprises and companies have to be able to embrace in order to remain relevant. So due to the increasing of that digital content of the products and the digitization of the value chain, engineering is becoming a key differentiator for the entire business, really for the growth and optimization, because now engineering and engineering elements inside of the product, inside of manufacturing are the key differentiation to the customer. IIoT connectivity across manufacturing, distribution, and the use of products is defining the brand for many companies because these are the things which define the customer journey and experience. And those are now becoming some of the key differentiators. So when we look at industries such as the automotive industry, the experience that the user has inside the automobile is becoming much more important than some of the other more traditional characteristics for a certain type of certain group of buyers, and that group of buyers is certainly growing. But this means that the engineering elements, even more so than they have done in the past, are really defining core differentiation for the entire business and how it goes to market. And so while we are seeing growth in all R&D spend, software is growing at a faster pace. And so I think, when we're out talking to a lot of clients and we're out talking to a lot of providers, there does seem to be this notion that maybe there's this trade or this exchange where you're seeing, declines in mechanical engineering at the expense of electrical engineering. That's really not the case. Really what you're seeing is you're seeing continued growth in those engineering areas that have been traditional, but you're seeing a much stronger growth in electrical, and then you're seeing this combined growth of those two things pulling together. But additionally, what you see is the development of service and software offerings growing at a much faster rate than what we would consider to be traditional product-based offerings. And a lot of companies are very focused on how they create service and software offerings out of their business, and they're focusing product development activity around determining that. So what does this drive? Well, I think one of the first dynamics that it drives is a shift beyond the core business and a change in what is core to that business. So I think if you look at, I'll use the automotive example again. Traditionally, the horsepower and the features of the automobile were a lot of its defining characteristics. Today, we find that the infotainment and the customer experience is becoming more of a core element. And so that really challenges companies. I think that really challenges companies to establish, what are the core pieces of the operation for us, and where is it that we need to focus on our differentiation. The second dynamic, though, that this drives is that the traditional talent pools and the scarcity of talent are driving interactions to be more collaborative and distributed. And so what that really means is that, we're seeing a dramatic increase in talent, and that talent is needed for software development inside of vehicles, inside of aircraft, inside of other products. It's also needed for the systems integration of the electrical and mechanical systems coming together, and that demand is pretty broad-based. And so companies are out there looking for talent really wherever they can get it. That's causing them to evaluate where they have engineering centers in their local economies, where they have engineering centers globally. But the demand and what's driving the market really is more the availability of talent, really than the cost of that talent or the scale. It's much more about finding access to markets where you can tap into those resource pools. So a third dynamic, of course, is quicker and quicker product launches. And we've seen this as a trend, coming up over the last 10, 20 years. And certainly with these new changes and the increased software elements of products, that cycle continues to increase, and customers are expecting even quicker product development cycles, and the time to market is becoming significantly shorter. And then the fourth dynamic really is new business models. And new business models are being brought on by the ability to monetize data, the ability to distribute the use of assets. When you think about driving services like Uber and the idea that autonomous vehicles will someday take that on, that really changes the model of an automotive company to look more towards selling fleets of vehicles to be distributed, to have their use distributed by many different users. And then, of course, the ability to sell services in companies that were traditionally just product companies. So what does it take to succeed in this new environment? So one aspect of that is that digital really is the future of product definition. It isn't the complete definition of the product. It's not as if that's the only thing that will be relevant, but it absolutely is one of the key differentiators for many products. And in some products, it was an element that didn't even exist years ago. And so, in many cases, it will be an additive element that will be brought in. And I think a challenge for many companies is, is this something that they want to initially try and build as they build into their products, or is that something that they want to partner and build an ecosystem, a larger ecosystem around to help shore that up? So, smart systems engineering, and smart really is the operative word here, because now we are connecting and creating all these different interactions between not only the systems within the products, but within from one product to the next. And we're creating much more complex and broader ecosystems. That's driving a lot of development of standards. That's developing a lot of requirements for various enterprises to create consortia where they have to share information to create those ecosystems, but at the same time, try not to offer up too much to have any of their intellectual property suffer. And certainly another theme to consider is the aspect of enterprise agility and agility overall, which is really, not just agile software development and Scrum, but really, this is much more about the ability to quickly adjust and iterate on designs in the design process overall, to push innovation out into the market quickly. And that's more than a change in team structure. It's absolutely a change in a cultural shift that enterprises will have to make in order to move forward. So this drives obviously a change also in the sourcing models, because there's changes and shifts in where talent is. There's changes and shifts in what is or may be core to a company, or what are the core skills that a company is needing to bring in. And so it changes those models to not just augment the existing engineering structure inside of the company, but it becomes much more about developing a robust partner ecosystem of shared responsibility. And that gets into this next element, which is those ecosystem partnerships. And this really becomes something that I think is required, and that we're seeing being required of companies to deal with that complexity. But this also, all of these dynamics also change the role of captives and captive centers. And what we are seeing is a strong emphasis on the part of enterprises to make their captive centers much more center of excellence focus, where they are global centers of excellence, and they're there to capitalize on a much larger resource pool, and to alleviate resource constraints that are occurring in other regions. And those captive centers are becoming much more dispersed. So they're occurring in North America, in Asia, and throughout Europe. There is certainly some areas and some geographies that dominate that, but you're seeing a much larger disbursement of those centers of excellence. So all of this is really increasing product complexity, and product complexity is no longer just hardware, but it also includes the ecosystem of connectivity in data. And so you're seeing this change occur across, and occur over the next few years. And we really see that those next couple of years will be critical as we pick through this, as it continues to pick up. So I'd like for my colleague Vishnu to talk a little bit about agile development and how that is shaping things inside of this new way of thinking.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So as we saw, the new definition of the product is now product plus connectivity plus services. So what that means is that we are already in the business of designing complex systems. And many of the successful companies that we work with, they have not only realized this, but they have also started to organize themselves accordingly. So for example, the Agile release train that you see here is a small team of 15 to 20 people, which synchronizes all the domains on the defined milestones for software, hardware, mechanical, which could be having very different release cycles. So that's one thing that we see here. Another important trend that we see here is many companies have actually looking at aerospace industry as a pioneer of multidisciplinary system engineering. So for example, DO 178 in aerospace is much more constraining than some of the other standards in other industries because it imposes traceability across the value chain. But now that traceability is becoming important in some other industries as well. And so many of the manufacturing firms are looking at some of the best practices there in the aerospace as well. We'll go to the next one. Now one interesting observation here is that all the 6 themes that Mike talked about are very closely linked to each other. So if the product definition is changing and becoming more expansive, as we see on the left picture, what that means is that it has direct implications on the way the composition of your engineering teams is going to change. So what we see on the right side is that apart from the traditional roles of product owner, product manager, we also now see, let's say, UX designer, or let's say automation engineer, or a security specialist as a part of that core team or the extended team. And quite often we see many legacy traditional companies talking about, not invented here syndrome, meaning this is all software, this does not apply to us. But our take is that irrespective of whether you are following a DevOps approach or waterfall or any traditional approach, what is becoming more critical is to define the right composition of this team, and the team or a squad or a tribe, whatever you may want to call, and how these self-sufficient teams talk to each other. That's I think is becoming more and more key. Let's move to the next theme of agility. This is one of the most talked about themes. At the same time, it is one of the most difficult to achieve because it needs different aspects to come together. So for example, we have taken 3 aspects here. The first one is that aligning your delivery engine according to the products. So what that means is that the traditional product-based hierarchical teams are changing into outcome-based teams where the team owns the complete end-to-end responsibility for a certain defined outcome. So the traditional way was have a multi-generation product plan and then staff those individual projects. But now more and more we are seeing these pods, self-sustaining pods, which could be based on either a technology or could be based on a part of the user journey, or it could be just based on some feature in the product. So that's the first one. The second one we see is the delivery models, and this becomes important because of different products in the company, we are going to have different ways of working. So it could be waterfall or agile or iterative. So how do we, club the products into these different delivery models? And also apply mechanisms for coordination amongst those. So for example, Scrum of Scrum, which deals with the interdependencies between these different products. And the third is about making the information available. And this is important because if you believe engineers are decision makers, they need the right information at the right time. And this is where the concept of digital thread comes in picture. So for example, people talk about AR and VR at the maintenance or shop floor. So while that will give its own benefits, but the benefits will get more compounded if that data is fed back to the design teams on a almost near time basis. So these are some of the things which we consider on overall enterprise agility level.
Thank you, Vishnu. And so what that's driving is that's driving companies to organize their resources in a much more leveraged delivery model, particularly around product-based delivery, and that takes a couple of different forms. Traditionally, there's been this idea of looking at those horizontal functions across the products, and internally most companies are organizing themselves in that way as well, in that they have a centralized, very focused and smaller product team, and then they leverage resources across horizontal engineering functions to pull into those product teams as they go through launch. And one of the models that we're seeing as people are adopting more and more in that direction, one is to take a look at, what are some of those horizontal functions that either are maybe not core to us, or simply are a larger skill set gap for us, where we need to look at developing some global center of excellence or looking for some sort of outside support. A second area is to actually then also look at some of the products themselves, rather than saying to yourself, we have the product focus teams to launch 4 products. So we're going to launch 4 and truncate 2 others. There is still that opportunity to look out into the marketplace and find expertise to launch some of those lower priority products that are still relevant to the marketplace, and maybe they complete the product offering or complete the product lineup for a larger product strategy. And so that's a model that can be used to bring those to market. But really, the main intent of all of this, I think, is to drive focus and skills development and accountability into all aspects of the endeavor. So both in the product teams and inside of those horizontal teams as well, whether they be internal or external. And so this is creating a marketplace for partnerships and support that's very fragmented. And so the pathway to leveraging focus means you have to have a framework for determining where partners should be leveraged and who is the best fit to share that accountability with. And so, in that evaluation, we see a number of companies that are citing things that were not core before, but now in a connected ecosystem are becoming more core, things that we're going to internalize. But also, as the product shifts and changes, there's some things that we always had considered to be core that maybe are less so. But I think the moral of that isn't to necessarily get into the weeds here on what that means for each company. It is more to say that the shape and the scope of product development is changing, and it really is time for most enterprises to sit back and take a new, fresh look and evaluate themselves and evaluate the ecosystem of partners that they have, to make sure that they really do have the skills and the network to develop the products that they're going to need to put into the market for the years to come. So this shift in focus, the shift in responsibility, is also driving a shift right of this spectrum of different services and how engineering services are brought to market. And it's really more a shift away from staff augmentation and a much more shift towards managed services. I think if you look at the engineering services marketplace, in previous years, particularly when resources were maybe less constrained than they are today, it was fairly typical to go through an exercise of planning product development, creating project plans for that, resource loading those project plans, and then figuring out where the gaps were and going to the market for individual people. And what clients are discovering is that when they're looking for people in those models, they don't necessarily exist, or if they do exist, they don't exist in the places that they had planned on them being, or they're unable to bring those in. And so that's really driving a number of customers to go back and reevaluate, how they plan that, and to start to pull in this idea of an ecosystem around product development much more earlier into that process, so that they can set up more managed services models, so that they can set up greater accountability inside of those supply chains, and create that focus really from the intent and design of how they plan to engage. And that clearly has an impact on their global engineering centers and where those centers should be and what those centers should be focused on. But in addition, another element of that is, as more and more companies are looking at their global engineering centers, whether they be in India or the U.S. or Europe, and they look at the core intellectual property that they're beginning to house inside of those centers, whether they be their own or otherwise, there does become this desire to look at, how can we take the center that we initially set up to just, provide us with some specific technology staff, or, eventually develop into this more center of an excellence model for global delivery, to really, how could we impact revenue? How could we now take and perhaps monetize some of those things that we've done, or turn that center into a center where we're able to offer and bring services out to our clients? So we'll talk here for a minute about, and we've already touched on a little bit, the evolution of how that's changed engineering sourcing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in some more specific, quantitative measure. But if you look at the current marketplace and the current environment, depending on the industry that you're in, and depending on what your strategy is, staff augmentation for engineering services may be as high as 45%. But we do see that continue to drop, and essentially what you're seeing is a halving of the left side of this, and you're seeing a doubling or more on the right side, and you're seeing this strong increase in development of these engineering services partnerships and larger ecosystems. And that's really a requirement and a byproduct of how product development is changing, and how we have all these more complex interactions in these newer systems. And this is also changing the dynamic of contract value. And that's really one of the leading indicators that we look at. So as we go through and we evaluate contracts and contract value in the marketplace through our research organization, one of the things that you'll see is that larger contracts were relatively flat in quantity going back over the last 2, 3, 4 years, kind of coming out of the recession into now. There had been some growth, and then that growth tapered off as resources became maybe a little bit more available in the marketplace. But as the economy has started to improve, as those resources have become more constrained, as this new complexity has started to come in, we're seeing a much higher compounded annual growth rate in the larger scale engineering services contracts, and that shows us a stronger trend towards larger engagements with accountability and ownership, and more of a managed services type of model. That doesn't mean that the other types of smaller SOW-based work are necessarily decreasing. It just means that there's a shift and a much stronger growth in managed services. And so we would expect, as we plot these curves further out, that you would start to see some divergence, and you would start to see those managed services take off even more, and maybe those lower forms of services start to taper off some. So then, looking at how service providers are, how the service provider community is adapting to that change. An important element of that ecosystem is how they're doing that, and one of the key elements of that is investment. So as more responsibility and ownership is expected of the providers, they must increase their own investments in infrastructure, and they start to have their own assets. So, certainly on the mechanical engineering side and on the embedded electronics side, we've seen a number of providers that are standing up their own labs, their own innovation centers, and they're no longer relying on those assets of their clients. And that's an important, I think, indicator for anybody who's out there who's working on the provider side. If they're not doing that, then that's something that they need to probably become more focused on for relevance. And for those that are out there on the client side, if they have providers that aren't making those investments, they may want to reconsider, the ecosystem of folks that they're working with. But then, of course, as we discussed previously, a second area of adaptation is this change of business models, and we're seeing a number of providers being proactive in going to clients and saying, look, this is the FTE count that we have today. This is how many people we have in all these different locations. This is not the most efficient model. It doesn't drive ownership for us. This is how we could change it. This is how we could come into a managed services contract and pushing that from their end. And I think that's something that they should be doing, and I think that's an expectation that clients should have. At the same time, they always won't have enough of that business to make that determination. So I think it's also important for clients to go through and be evaluating the landscape of the support that they receive, and look for those opportunities to combine and create and drive accountability inside of their organization. And so a key element of that becomes ownership. Ownership of maintained products and sustenance is a key area. So as products are changing and the software element maybe becomes something that's newer, some of those older legacy products or legacy systems that are not that don't have some of those elements in them are moving into a sustenance mode. And there's a lot of work that can be done to potentially leverage providers to provide that. And so a number of them are becoming focused in that area, and a number of clients are focusing on leveraging their partner ecosystem in that way. But that really is moving the delivery models to a much more end-to-end model with more horizontal ownership and potentially even some product ownership. It's driving a change, as we talked about, in the global engineering centers, and looking at those as more of, really more of centers of excellence, whether internal or external, and certainly driving things to be, first more project-based, then maybe more managed services-based, but starting to put some of that accountability into the ecosystem to drive efficiency and to really drive the optimization of the resources, which is really the scarce element that drives a lot of this ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to take a moment and have Aditi walk us through a case study from HCL to kind of highlight some of these points. Aditi?
Thank you, Mike. So, when Mike and Vishnu spoke about the transformation that is happening in product development, the engineering services outsourcing, the global engineering centers, and so we will cover all of that in this case study. It really illustrates the transformation and the change that is happening in our customer base, right? So this is a case study where HCL took a leadership role in partnering with a very large medical device manufacturer based out of the US, and strategically partnered in their digital journey. Okay, so this is a company which manufactures sterilization devices. So they design, develop, and manufacture these devices. And these devices traditionally are unconnected, or they have no connectivity. So if you can think about sterilizers, right, they are used in hospitals, industrial labs, right, for sterilizing various small tools that perform surgery and other things, right? So it's traditionally, these sterilizers are like steam sterilizers, which are hundreds of years old. They could be plasma sterilizers, which are fairly new, or they could be hydrogen peroxide, H2O2 sterilizers, which have been there in the market for about 15 to 20 years, right? So this product that we revolutionized was with the H2O2, or the hydrogen peroxide sterilizers. Okay, these products, the sterilization products, have not really changed over past many years, right? Some of them are 100 years old, some of them are 20 years old, and they are installed in the hospitals or labs, and they run, right? But what the customer wanted to do is they wanted to have a visibility. Our customer, which is the sterilization product manufacturer, they wanted to have a visibility on the usage of this product. How are the hospitals using these products? How are the labs using these products, right? They wanted to get that visibility so they can improve the user experience, they can provide better services, and improve the downtime of these machines, right? And they wanted to understand where they could provide more support with geographies, and where a lesser support would be perfect, right? So so that was the vision and the intent of this program. So what HCL did is that we brought in our services and our platform accelerators to create a connectivity and a platform, as well as deriving data insights from this sterilization devices in the installed base they had, right? So you can see it is engineering services. It's a product which is moving towards the digital technology, right? And taking advantage of the digital technology. So what basically drive this is you connect the sterilizers using various connectivity technology to a platform. You basically provide remote monitoring of these devices, right? You look at, can we provide, are these machines up or they're down? What kind of software upgrades or firmware upgrades are needed, so you can push it remotely to these devices using the cloud-enabled platform, right? So what that does is that it reduces the service cost, right? Because typically a field service engineer would have to go to the site, to the hospital or the labs, and perform these operations, right? Software upgrades. If there's a equipments are down, they'll have to go and maintain and bring it up, right? So, so how do you automate that? How do you get that visibility real time? And the next step is actually predicting that these machines are going to fail and be able to be ready to service them, so that you can minimize the downtime, right? So those were all the different reasons why they were our customer was moving towards a digital platform, right? So HCL provided the connectivity, the platform accelerator, and developed the entire solution. So the various functionalities of this platform is essentially hospital onboarding with very few steps. These devices could be onboarded in a hospital instead of taking several days to do that. The device onboarding, right? How do you bring the sterilization devices on to this platform using a single gateway? So you connect 3 or 4 sterilizers to a single gateway and you onboard them. Device management and monitoring that we spoke about, and of course have a portal so you can get a visibility of the sterilization cycle information from the different sterilizers. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So here is the impact that this program created, right? It had three areas of impact: the user value chain, the service value chain, and the asset value chain. So in the user value chain, basically the users of this instrument, right? They could perform better planning having the data. They get the sterilization failure alerts and can prepare in advance to take care of that. There could be good amount of capacity planning, right? How many sterilization you need to meet the demand. And there was, of course, the digital record of the entire life cycle and the usage cycle of the sterilizers. So that is what the digital enablement brought to the user value chain. In the service value chain, the equipment data, right? The day-to-day operating parameters of the equipment, those were available real time using this connectivity and the platform, right? Previously, without the connectivity, the field service technician would have to go to the hospital, put in USB, download the data, and then bring it back, which was all after the fact. Whereas with this particular solution, you can monitor the data real time on what is going on with the equipment. So it helped equipment monitoring, equipment management. It helps in quick device provisioning. And then, of course, you can perform a lot of device analytics on it, right? And you can provide the right level of services to the customer. For example, a hospital in the West Coast may be using the sterilizers a lot more than the hospital in East Coast. So obviously, the service representative now has the information that I probably need to supply many more refills in the West Coast versus the East Coast. So that type of analytics helped to maintain certain level of inventory and keep the machines running, right? And then in the asset value chain, you're connecting these devices using a gateway, and you're basically able to much better manage these assets, right? That in the hospitals. So overall, the benefits that we delivered is improving the device uptime, reducing the field visit costs, increase the device sales globally and the replenishment sales globally, and you are digitizing it, so you eliminate the paper records, right, and have everything digital. So this kind of gives you an idea of how a traditional product, which is unconnected, went through a digital journey of connectivity, and how a partner like HCL provided services and platform accelerators and delivered this project from our global engineering centers in India. So thank you so much. So that's pretty much what I have. So we'll take any questions, suggestions from the audience. Nicole, over to you.
And so to clarify, if there are any questions, since you're unable to speak, just go ahead and type those into the chat box for questions, and we'll be able to see those and answer those for you. So Nicole, not necessarily seeing any questions. I don't know if we can just we should just close out. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and close out. Thank you all for participating, and then if you have some follow up, you should be able to reach out and get in touch with us. And if you want to get any clarification, this was recorded, so you'll be able to go back, take another listen, and be able to share it with colleagues if needed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just typing out my email address here. So if folks, you have a contact point as well. If you have any questions, you can reach us in case we're not able to hear you right now. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.